Okay, so I've been talking a lot about the why. Why did the founders make the government that they did? Why did they compromise? Why we should vote? Why we should understand the system? But I've only kind of given you bits and pieces about what the system actually is. So this video will hopefully clear up a little bit more about exactly what our federal government looks like, what our Leviathan actually is, and ultimately, was the compromise worth it? Now, unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that. I have an opinion, but I can't prove it 100% because I do recognize there are flaws. However, I can describe, for better or for worse, what our social contract, our Constitution, our Leviathan actually looks like. Okay, so if you look on screen, you will see that I have listed the three major types of governmental systems: unitary, confederal, and the federal. A unitary system is a system in which power is 100% concentrated in the central government. Regional governments like cities, states, counties exist, but only exist to carry out the orders of the central government. They have very little influence on the central government above it. Governments like this exist in Japan and England, where that top government is where all the laws and all the rules for the entire country are made. There are no local laws. There's just the central, just the top level of government. Then there is the confederal systems. America tried to do this and it failed. This is where independent states join together and delegate, that means hand out, limited powers to a central government, but the central government has no power to do anything for itself. It can only just do what the individual states tell it to do. The only example today that I can think of that works like this is the European Union, where many countries in Europe all agree to be a part of the Union, but they still maintain their own power base, their own country, their own identity, but they agree to play by the rules and create rules together for the Union, with the understanding that the Union can't truly force anything back onto the individual countries. And finally, we have the American system, the federal system. This is where national, state, and regional local governments all share power. All levels have the power to make their own laws, elect officials, and create agencies. So power is distributed all throughout the system. It's not all at the top, but it's not all at the bottom. There's some for everybody. And in the American government, in this federal system, there are 6 major principles: popular sovereignty, limited government, separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial review, and federalism. Now, federalism is what we just talked about, having shared power, mixed power between the upper level of government and the lower level, so that one doesn't completely dominate the other. Both need to be respected. Another principle is popular sovereignty. The first sentence of the Constitution, the highest law of the land, our written out government, says, "We the people." The reason why the first 3 words are "we the people" is because this is confirming the influence of both John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, that the government only has as much power as us citizens give it. This government is us. It's not some king, it's not some tyrant, it's not some dictator, it is us. We are the rulers. We created this government, we are the government. Which goes hand in hand with the other principle of limited government. People can support or weaken the government by becoming active in the political process. Citizens vote and can hold the government accountable. As a reminder, limited government doesn't describe how much power the government has, it's just describing that it is being limited by something. We are that something. We, the people, are the something that's limiting the government. If we want a strong government, we get it. If we want a weak government, we can make that happen too. The limit is the people, us. We are the limit on the government in limited government. It is limited to what we want it to be. The next principle I want to talk about is the principle of separation of powers, which actually kind of covers checks and balances and judicial review as well. So we're just going to talk about all three of those principles right here. So the principle of separation of powers, simply put, is to further control the Leviathan of government by dividing it into three branches. So we make this big Leviathan, but then we split it into three different Leviathans, and we make sure we kind of turn them all against each other so that one keeps the other one from becoming too strong for us, the people, holding on the chains to control. Those three branches, and I've mentioned them before, are the legislative, which is Congress. Congress has the power to pass laws, but its check on the other piece of the government, on the other piece of the Leviathan, is that it can impeach and remove the president if he violates the law or the Constitution. And the president is the leader of the executive branch. The executive branch does a number of things, the chief one being enforcement of the law, but also the president can veto, block laws passed by the legislative branch, Congress. Now, the good side of this is that if the president's acting out of control, Congress can get rid of him. If Congress passes a law that's unfair or hurts people's rights, the president can stop that. The flaw is, what if they come from different parties? Remember political parties? We talked about Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Well, they don't exist anymore, but we have Democrats and Republicans. So what happens if you have, say, a Democratic president and a Republican Congress, and they don't agree with each other, and they don't like each other? So that can create gridlock because Congress will try to write laws, but then the president will just stop them, which means no laws get made. This causes gridlock, like traffic when it gets stopped up and no one can leave anywhere until the mess gets sorted out and we figure out how to remove the roadblock, which is in this case a disagreement between the party controlling the executive branch, the president, and the party controlling the legislative branch, Congress. Now, those two powers I talked about, that the legislative has over the executive, that the executive has over the legislative, those are examples of checks and balances. Each branch has the ability to check each other and balance their power out. Checks and balances. Well, we also have a third branch, the judicial branch. That's also known as the Supreme Court. And their check and balance is the power of judicial review. Judicial review gives the judicial branch the power to void, throw out any law, executive order, or any act passed by the president or Congress that violates the Constitution. Now, those three branches of government represent the strong central government that the Federalists really wanted. It also represents, even with the Leviathan broken up into three pieces, exactly what the Anti-Federalists were afraid of. So part of the compromise that the Anti-Federalists got was the idea of amendments. Amendments are changes to the Constitution, additions that allows America to fill in the blanks, fill in the gaps of things that maybe the original founders, the original writers didn't think of. Because what if they forgot something? Or what if their definition of freedom and liberty changes over time? People need a way to be able to change their government to reflect the way that sometimes issues that existed 200 years ago don't exist anymore. And issues that exist now couldn't possibly have been thought of 200 years ago, like internet laws. How does freedom of speech relate to the internet? Founding fathers couldn't have figured that out. So they created the system of amendments to spell out what rights we have, as well as give us a way to make changes over time as our definitions of freedom also change over time. And 5 major issues that constitutional amendments have addressed over time include states' rights, which is protecting the states' rights to have power over themselves, to have some decisions that the central government at the top can't force them to change. Basic personal freedoms, life, liberty, speech, religion, all those kind of things. Status of African Americans. They used to be slaves. Now they're not. Now they're citizens. That was something that was resolved through the Constitution by making amendments. Voting rights. Who gets to vote? Women, people over the age of 18 instead of 21, who's a citizen? Voting rights was also something worked out through the amendment process. And finally, presidential term limits, because presidents didn't always have terms. There was a time when presidents, if they wanted to, could just keep running for election over and over and over again. That's no longer true. You get 2 terms, and that is something that was made clear through the amendment process. And that's it. If you have any questions, let me know in class, and thank you.